The new year has begun. January is finished. It's time to jumpstart your garden. February Sowings, week 1. In today's video, we shall be beginning our February sowings. Now, although it's an absolutely gorgeous day outside that Mother Nature has treated us to on this, the 1st of February, it's still far too cold, certainly here in our Norfolk no-dig garden, to be even contemplating direct sowing anything. So everything that we need to sow needs to be under cover. You can see that our January sowings, they're doing really well. The onions, they're looking great. And we shall look a bit later at how our chilies, peppers and aubergines are doing. Remember, myself and Mrs. W have been using grow lights for the first time ever. We wouldn't normally sow anything that early of that nature. It would normally be towards the end of this month that we would start our chilies, peppers and aubergines off. So do stick around to the end of the video to have a look and see just how we are getting on. But for now, we need to start our first sowings of February off. The first thing I'm going to sow are our lettuce. We still have lots of lettuce to eat, either here in the poly or over there in the greenhouse. But eventually that will come to an end. And of course what we need is something to have after they have finished giving us their harvest. I'm going to be sowing 2 varieties, Webb's Wonderful and Little Gem. And as usual, whenever I want to make sowings at this time of the year, the compost is stored down in our house, and that means that it's nice and warm for the seeds to be sown into and not freezing cold. The other thing is that we fill trays with some tap water, and that's just been standing around so that, again, that's nice and warm. I'm going to start with a Little Gem. And when it comes to lettuce, you can see you get absolutely hundreds and hundreds of seed. And it always makes me smile because it's something that I don't need hundreds and hundreds of. I just want some lettuce leaves to eat. And myself and Mrs. W do tend to pick the lettuce leaves rather than let it heart up. So I don't need very many. If you were going to be growing lettuce to heart up, then you probably would want more lettuce and they would take up more space. And I'm just going to broadcast sow these and simply... And that's all I have to do. I'm not going to need that many lettuce, but at least I know I will have enough from that pinch of seed. And then, as is my preferred method, I just put some vermiculite thinly over the top. You could use compost if you want to, just a thin layer of compost, that's fine. Equally too, I just find that that stops it from capping and becoming crusty and hard. Now, because we've broadcast sowed these seed, they will need pricking out in a few weeks' time. If you're not familiar with the term of pricking out and how to do it, then do look out for that video. And of course the best way to know whenever we put a video out is to make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and click the notification bell, because in that way you'll be notified whenever we upload a video. Let's put the labels in, and then they can go into our water. Next I want to sow some beetroot. Beetroot we multi-sow, but you do have to be a bit careful with beetroot in that you can see they look like bits of cork, but there could be several plants that could come up from a cluster. On the other hand, there could only be one that comes up. So I tend to hedge my bets by just putting 3 seeds per cell. And I find we get enough beetroot germinate in that cell for us then to be able to use. Now of course, if you do get several germinate from these seeds, you're going to need to thin them down. We tend to thin ours down really to about 4, certainly no more than 5. And they'll go out into the garden as a clump and grow happily together, and you get more beetroot in that space that you're growing in. So that was the Burpees Golden, and on the opposite side I'm going to put some Bolt Hardy.
My favourites.
Your favourites, yes. And what I will say, although you won't see me do it on camera, Mrs. W's bought a packet of seeds of a different variety. They're called Detroit.
Detroit 2, I think they're called.
Yeah.
I was actually given them, so a friend gave them to me, so.
Yeah, so we'll give those a try. And if any of you have tried that variety before, do let us know in the comments. Let us know what it's like. When it comes to comments, I'd like to thank all of you for your lovely comments that you give us. It really helps gives us ideas for our channel, because the questions you ask, they do help to form the basis of future videos. So don't think that, by giving us a comment we ignore it. For starters, we love to engage with you. But like I say, it's really helpful to us to know what we're likely to be filming over the next few months. Stick a label in there, Mrs. W.
Brilliant. Put them in the water, yeah.
And we'll stick those in the water. And of course the sowings of February will be amongst some of the very first harvest that you get. So next I'm going to sow some radish. Radish are really quite good, especially if you are a bit impatient for something new, because these don't take very long to produce their harvest at all. And I'm going to multi-sow these two. I'm aiming for 4 seeds per cell. Don't stress too much if it ends up being 5 or only 3. Next, I want to start some leeks off. Now, in the past, I've always started my leeks off in April, and that's worked fine, but I have noticed the last couple of seasons that our leeks haven't been so good. So I'm going to try sowing some this month, next month, and in April, and we'll see how they do. So we're going to start with a variety called Bulgarian Giant. Now, of course, they look like smaller versions of onion seeds. That's because they belong to the allium family. I always think leeks are really good value if you can grow them. They're a great vegetable to eat and to use, but it's one of those that you get lots of seed from for very little money. And all I'm going to do is broadcast sow these over here. And then the next variety is new to us. It's called Giant di Inverno. That sounds Italian.
It does.
And we shall do it in exactly the same way. And just broadcast those over the surface. We tend to grow about 80 leeks in a season, so I don't need to do lots and lots, especially as I'm going to be sowing some this month, next month and the month after. And then we shall just again cover those with vermiculite. Stick the label in. Mrs. W often has to remind me of that. I'm far too eager to get them underway. And then they can go into the water.
February is a really good month to get ahead with sowing your herbs. Got 5 varieties here that I'm going to sow today. First being some sage seeds, and I'm just going to, quite nice size seeds, I'm going to just aim for 2 seeds per cell, and then I may even leave them together to grow together. We'll see how they go, if they germinate both together. If not, we can thin to the strongest seedling. Next is some sweet basil. And these all will start off indoors on probably on the kitchen windowsill or the spare bedroom windowsill. One of the windowsills. Now the basil seeds are smaller. I'm just going to sprinkle just a little tiny pinch in each cell. Aim for maybe 3. Now these are tiny seeds. They're like, I'd say they're smaller than a grain of salt, to be honest, so tiny little pinch.
Sun has brought the birds out. I can hear them chattering away.
Yeah, they're quite active at the moment, aren't they? It's quite lovely to see in the garden, I think. Had my wildlife camera out on the bird box, but they seem to be looking. There's a pair of great tits, I think they are, and they keep looking at it going in, but then they move away, and I don't see them for a few days. So I think having the cats, I think it's probably putting them off a bit. The fourth one are some chives, and like the onions, we're going to multi-sow, and they are from the onion family. You can see they're just a smaller version of the seeds. With these, probably 6 or 7 in a cell would be fine.
Great to use in salads, aren't they? Rather than chopping an onion,
yeah.
you can just chop the green stalks and you get that lovely taste of onion.
Yeah, and then you get the lovely flowers as well, which are edible. And
the bees absolutely love too, don't
they?
They
do, yeah. They're a really good plant to have. And lastly, oregano. Now I sowed some of these in January, but they didn't germinate, and I don't know why, so I've found a different packet. I'm going to have another go, not to be outdone. These are quite large seeds, oregano, quite nice seeds, so we'll put in 2 seeds per cell. For the first mistake of the day, I've just sown what I told you were oregano, and they are actually coriander seeds, so I'm just changing the label. And I shall sow the oregano separately. Sorry.
And then lastly, for February week 1, I want to sow our shallots. This is a variety called Zabroon. We like it, we know it grows really well. But I have had some suggestions in the comments. Florence Red it was, wasn't it, Mrs. W?
Long Red Florence, I think.
Long Red Florence.
I think so.
So actually I am going to try and see if I can get a hold of some of those seeds, and I'll sow those. It'll be this month, but obviously not on today's film. But these are Zabroon, they really do grow huge shallots. What I'm aiming for this time is 2 seeds per cell, and then we shall thin those down to the strongest seedling before we transplant them. Again, don't stress if you don't get 2, if you get 3 in there. Really not going to matter. As I say, you're going to thin it down to just the one seedling anyway. Now the shallots, they shall actually go on to our heat mat. They don't have to. In fact, nothing we've sown today needs to go on a heat mat. They'll germinate perfectly well in your house. But as we have got the heat mat, and it's relatively free at the moment, I'm going to put those shallots onto the heat mat. Everything else will just go on a windowsill in the house until it germinates, and then it all comes up to here. Now somebody did mention about, I don't have a polytunnel, will I be able to sow? Yes, you'll be able to sow, because they can go down to the house where they will germinate. But what you can do is knock yourself up a really quick and easy cold frame. That could be made of any materials. Wood, you probably want a glass top like an old window or something. Find things in the garden, get inventive and make yourself a little cold frame. You know that Mrs. W made me one the other year that we use, and that will just keep the worst of the weather off, because things like brassicas and onions, once they have germinated, the cold is not really going to affect them. You just want to keep the worst of the winter rains, snow or anything else that you might get off of them, and the cold frame will offer you that. Now, you may be wondering why I haven't sown everything that I talked about in the 15 seeds to sow for February. Well, the answer to that is that we don't have huge amounts of space, so we need to keep moving things along as and when the heat mat becomes available when we want to use it. But even also up there, Mrs. W has made these floating shelves, but there's only a certain amount of room. So everything we've sown today, we have enough room to get onto these shelves as and when they need to come up here. The things that we sow round about mid-month, of course there'll be another further 2 weeks on before they've germinated and are ready to come onto the shelving. By then we'll have moved other plants along, and it won't be as necessary for them to be in here. In fact, the brassicas that I sowed as an experiment in January, they're coming along nicely. I can take those off the shelf probably around about mid-month, and we can put them into our cold frame. Brassicas are fine out in the cold. Now, shall we go and have a look and see our setup of grow lights? So here is our grow light setup. That's what Mrs. W bought me for my Christmas present. At this moment in time, we have all of our peppers, chili peppers and aubergines in this setup. And they're actually working really well. And just to show you the difference that it makes, these are the plants that were left over. And you can see just how far up they're trying to reach to get to the light. Now Mrs. W has set something up in the greenhouse that we'll show you in a future video that will hopefully help anybody that has this problem. These seedlings are not totally out of the picture. They can be buried a little deeper for starters. The problem is that they will start to reach for the light again once you start getting them going again. So keep an eye on the channel. We'll have something to show you that could really help with this and stopping your seedlings becoming too leggy. So there were 5 pods that came with this, and I know that there are probably more expensive and better grow lights than this, but I have to say this really has worked and has been a game changer for myself and Mrs. W. They're growing away really nicely. Not too much, just enough. So once again, a huge thanks to you all for your lovely comments, and do please keep them coming. We really do love to get your comments. We read them all. Sometimes I answer them, sometimes Mrs. W answer them, depending on who the question is directed to. Done a fair few sowings today, but there are still more to do. Maybe you don't have your seeds yet, maybe you haven't made up your mind which varieties to grow. But if you're not sure what you can be sowing in the month of February, then watch this video next. Have a great rest of your gardening week, and myself and Mrs. W, we shall see you very soon.